change places, and so we proceed to the debate on the management culture of the Post Office. I call Marion Fellows to move the motion.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and yes, I want to move that motion. I want to talk again about management culture of Post Office Limited, and I want to thank the Backbench Business Committee for allowing me this chance. I did speak in this very subject in Westminster Hall in July last year, but I think it's even more pertinent now. The Horizon IT scandal was the result of the culture of Post Office management, and in his March 2019 judgment in Bates and Others versus Post Office Limited, Mr Justice Fraser stated, "There seems to be a culture of secrecy and excessive confidentiality generally within the Post Office, but particularly focused on Horizon." Following this damning judgment, Nick Reid, who was appointed as CEO, set out about changing the management culture of Post Office Limited when taking over in September 2019. In a letter to the Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Committee in June 21, he stated that he was undertaking to drive a culture of genuine commercial partnership between Post Office and postmasters with openness and transparency at its heart. He said, "A major programme of improvement has been underway. The goal is to overhaul the culture of Post Office Limited." I reiterate his words, openness and transparency, and to overhaul the culture of Post Office Limited. Since last July, we've seen a spate of historic scandals emanate from Sir Wyn Williams' statutory inquiry, from Post Office staff pursuing prosecutions despite knowing of Horizon issues, others boastfully emailing colleagues, celebrating sending innocent sub-postmasters to jail, and then to auditors omitting evidence in witness statements. It has been another shameful chapter in Post Office history, and from the outset I want to commend the work of the inquiry for bringing these issues and many others to light. However, it is worth pointing out that over 40 management staff are employed, have been there throughout the Horizon scandal period. Some have given evidence to the inquiry and have demonstrated elements of the toxic management culture that's gone on too long. The continual disclosures that have blighted the inquiry appear to be another spanner in the works, as one victim said, in a clear case of obfuscation under the watch of Post Office Limited current management, suggesting that very little has changed within the organisation. Certainly.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. She's making a very powerful opening speech, and I commend her efforts on this issue more generally as well. Does my honourable friend agree with me and many of my constituents in East and Bartonshire that there was a culture created in the Post Office, a really difficult culture of secrecy, that the ITV drama Mr Bates versus the Post Office highlighted, and that's what resonated so much with so many of our constituents, that they were othered by Post Office Limited and by the government at that point, and they weren't listened to and they weren't respected. Does my honourable friend agree?
Absolutely agree, and the ITV drama has really exposed what happened in a way that, despite numerous efforts by many distinguished people in this place and in the other place, and for journalists like Nick Wallace and Computer Weekly, many thousands of people knew about this scandal, but not everybody, not the general public, and that's really what that drama brought about.
Would the Honourable Lady give way?
Certainly.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for giving way. I congratulate her on getting this debate, because, like me, she's heard me speak often enough about the culture in the Post Office. Does she agree with me, though, that a good approach is often to follow the money? That, in fact, last year the cost of administering the Post Office centrally went up by 10%, but the money that went to postmasters went down by 2%. When these figures are reversed, we will know that there has been a genuine change of culture within the post office.
I could not agree more with the right honourable gentleman, and I frequently agree with him on post office managers. This is really important because the all-party parliamentary group, post offices of which he is a member, and I am chair, is the real cross-party group in this place. There are no groups who don't have members in it. So, Sean Hudson of the Communication Workers Union described the management culture, I think, perfectly. He said, every serious management failure results in a culture of offering that failure up for external investigation at significant expense to Post Office Limited and the taxpayer without learning from those mistakes. It has since transpired that the legal fees spent on resolving disclosure issues in the last year alone was £24 million. This money could have gone into the network to help struggling sub-postmasters, many of whom are working for below minimum wage. For context, POL announced remuneration improvements this year of just £26 million, which in no way takes into account the rise of costs and overheads. Some of the issues were only brought to light through the perseverance of campaigners through freedom of information requests that revealed not all relevant evidence had been disclosed to the inquiry. Some of the issues outlined came to light before the transmission of ITV's Mr Bates versus the Post Office, and again that has had a monumental effect on public consciousness in Britain. It's really important that this was beamed into front rooms across the nation, and it has caused deep distrust of post office management by the general public. With the words openness and transparency in mind, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to bring your attention to the case of my constituent, Salman Aslam. Salman, or Sal, is a young man who ran a post office in my constituency for 5 years before he walked away last year. Sal took over the post office from his father when he was in remission from Hodgkin's lymphoma and began noticing shortfalls which he continually plugged himself. It ranged from £4,000 to £16,000 at a time. He estimates that he's paid in about £100,000 of his own money. When audited last year, a shortfall doubled in front of his eyes to £80,000. He decided he could no longer go on for the sake of his finances, mental and physical health, which doctors were saying was under threat due to his levels of stress. Throughout the 5-year ordeal, Sal contacted the post office for help continually, but none was forthcoming. And since handing in his keys, the post office had not been in touch, leaving him in a perennial state of stress and fear for over a year. Sal went public with his story a few weeks ago. I must say, Madam Deputy Speaker, I did have a hand in that. And once the story went out, Post Office Limited immediately sprang into action, and the Communications Department got in touch with them. This is not indicative of a culture change. It echoes tales of the past we're all too familiar with. Desperate postmasters reaching out to Post Office Limited for help, but receiving little in return. Communication from Post Office Limited only arriving after some negative press. Post Office Limited, throughout the Horizon scandal, prioritised institutional reputation over the welfare of sub-postmasters, who Mr Reid himself recently told the Business and Trade Committee were the trusted asset that made the network what it is. Sal is one of many postmasters that have been in touch in the past number of weeks to tell me that they're experiencing shortfalls, not historical shortfalls, but ones that have occurred in the past year. Issues with Horizon appear to be continuing to this day, which is seriously concerning. Is the Minister aware of ongoing issues with Horizon? And what has he done or is he going to do to address these? Sal, like all the victims that preceded him, is in this position through no fault of his own. And today I call for an undertaking from the Government, the Post Office's sole shareholder, that he will not be pursued for the ghost debt of £80,000. And secondly, that the Government examines what kind of redress he can expect, having sunk so much of his own money into the Post Office to cover repeated shortfalls generated by Horizon. I have other constituents who are in this position. The culture change that Nick Reid has called for has not been apparent. In 2023, Post Office Limited was rocked once again by more scandals. One appropriately named Bonusgate. And the former chair of the Business and Trade Committee, the Honourable Member for Bristol North West, outlined at that meeting the statutory definition of false accounting and continued that it seems to me that in the annual accounts that Post Office reported to Parliament, there was false or misleading information presented that did lead to financial gain. I said in July, this is the management culture of Post Office Limited. Bonuses for doing a reasonable job. Compared with that, the compensation schemes have been fraught with difficulty every single step of the way. The fundamental principles of public life, including openness, honesty and integrity, have not been upheld by the management of Post Office Limited for decades. Regrettably, even the compensation schemes established to address the injustices of the lamentable Horizon chapter are not immune from Post Office Limited's unjust approach. Dan Needle, a renowned tax expert, soon realised that the schemes are designed to ensure the lowest amount of compensation is paid out. The application forms are so legally intricate that even a legal expert like Mr Needle expressed the need for legal advice to complete them. But Post Office Limited only provide token amounts for legal advice. The original absence of an option to claim punitive damages, something a lawyer would notice, put applicants, frequently elderly and financially vulnerable, at risk of missing out on a significant portion of their compensation. Madam Deputy Speaker, I've seen an offer, heavily redacted, and that's what happened to a sub-post mistress who was spat upon by her local community after rumours of her stealing abounded in the neighbourhood. It is absolutely appalling, shameful, and a stain on us all. Professor? Yes.
I'm very grateful for her giving way, and she earlier in her points remarks upon the number of people coming forward. I'm very keen for them to do that following the ITV series. I think it's very important that we say to all postmasters they will be treated fairly. And I know she has some concerns around that, and she's right to raise them where she has those concerns. And I have some concerns too in some of the elements of the original scheme, the HSS scheme, and we are looking at that in conjunction with the advisory board of what might be done to make sure those payments were fair. But I can just draw attention to some of the stats on the scheme we're running now, the new schemes, GLO scheme, for example. And these may be the simpler cases that are coming forward, but of the 58 claims received, 52 offers have been made, 41 offers have been accepted, without even reference to the independent panel that's there if people are unhappy with offers made. I do believe that offers made are fair, but I'm also very happy to be challenged and make sure they are.
The Minister for his intervention, and I know he's worked hard since he took over in his post to make things better, but it would not be right if I did not continually and continuously push him, and he is acknowledging that. I think at this point it is worth me reading out a letter from Professor Chris Hodges, the chair of the Advisory Compensation Board, who has been similarly scathing. The letter was addressed to Nick Reid, the CEO. Dear Nick Reid, my colleagues on the Advisory Board and I remain deeply unconvinced by the substance of what you say on legal issues. We continue to hear stories. Your former sub-postmasters and mistresses are confused, intimidated and hurt by the behaviour of the Post Office and its lawyers in negotiating settlements generally and in continued use of legalistic terminology. Yeah. This is especially true for the significant number who remain deeply traumatised and who do not understand the practice of terminology of what they see as an aggressive approach to settling claims. This is irrespective of whether the language or behaviour may or may not be technically permissible, and irrespective of the fact that they may have legal representation. Your reliance of legal argument and legal terminology similarly does not impress us. We do not perceive demonstration of behaviour that is anything like a sympathetic understanding towards the people your organisation have harmed. We suggest that this should give you cause for deep concern.
Will the Honourable Lady give way on that point?
Certainly.
I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way. She's giving an excellent speech about a very sad chapter in the Post Office's life. As someone who's involved from the beginning, back in 2012, Ron Warmington's first investigation into the Post Office Horizon scandal, he came to the conclusion that the Post Office always tended to promote from within, which led to a very incestuous management style and the keeping of secrets. And does she think that that might be part of the problem?
The Honourable Lady answers the intervention. I've allowed the Honourable Gentleman to make his intervention because the House is quiet, but I don't think he was here at the beginning of the Honourable Lady's speech. Was he? If the Honourable Gentleman wasn't here at the beginning of the Honourable Lady's speech, it's not in order for him to make an intervention in the speech. I've allowed it this afternoon because the House is quiet, but these rules are here for a good reason and they have to be observed. It's perfectly in order for the Honourable Gentleman to intervene in another speech later after he's been in the chamber for a while, but I have to make this point because if I don't make an example of the Honourable Gentleman now on a quiet day, we'll totally lose control on busy days when lots of people want to do that and it's not right. But in these circumstances where there are very few people here this afternoon and there's plenty of time, I've allowed the Honourable Gentleman to make his point and I will allow the Honourable Lady to answer it.
Deputy Speaker, I agree with the Honourable Gentleman, and he too has been one of the people who have been pursuing this business for many, many years, and I pay tribute to him for that. Madam Deputy Speaker, shockingly, the Post Office's attempt to suppress the truth continues as they caution sub-postmasters under the Horizon Shortfall Scheme against mentioning compensation terms to anyone. The overall process of seeking fair compensation is described by one applicant as soul-destroying, raising concerns about the added suffering imposed on these individuals who've already endured so much. And again, I have a personal example of a constituent who I'm trying to persuade to apply, but he is terrified, scared to actually apply because he signed a non-disclosure agreement. And because of the treatment and what he's heard of what has happened to others, he is even more afraid.
On that point?
Certainly.
I commend the Honourable Lady as well. One of the things that has burdened me, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I think it burdens us all in this House, is those who unfortunately took their own lives as a result of all that happened. I'm very conscious that the families that are left behind now carry that burden. And does the Honourable Lady agree with me and probably with everyone else in this House that there should be some methodology to ensure that those families who are left without a loved one, but also with a real worry, that they are helped through this process that they may find equally terrifying and worrying.
I absolutely agree with the Honourable Member for Strangford. It's really important, and many victims have described themselves as suffering from PTSD, and there is no scheme in place to help them and their families through what has been a traumatic and absolutely awful time for all of them, especially when someone has died before they have been vindicated. And there are many recent examples of that. I'll give way to the Minister.
I'm very grateful. Sorry to intervene on the Honourable Lady yet again, but I just feel that perhaps people might be listening to her speech more than they might listen to mine at the end. So I was keen to get this on the record. But just in the point of the non-disclosure agreements, it has been quite clear from the Post Office in evidence to the Select Committee and certainly our position that nobody will be held to their non-disclosure agreement. So anybody can feel completely at liberty to discuss the terms of their settlement, certainly with members of Parliament and others, as they might feel appropriate. It's very important to get that on the record, I think.
I really want to thank the Minister for that intervention, because I think my constituent hearing that, I wouldn't like to describe the Minister, I'll say direct from the Minister himself, that he won't be pursued. It will provide him with some element of comfort. But I have to point out that people are traumatised, still traumatised years later, because of the treatment they've had. Yep. And it's hard for them to believe that people will not pursue them. But I will take that clip and show it to my constituent. I met recently with Christopher Head, Madam Deputy Speaker. He's in the gallery today, who's a Horizon victim and a campaigner who helps others applying for compensation and out of his own goodwill. And I don't want anyone else to add to Christopher's burden, because he's doing such a good job. And he's told me of the difficulties people face, and that he himself received an offer that was only a minuscule fraction of his estimated horizon losses. Alan Bates recently came out and talked about his debate, his offer as well. Many sub-postmasters I've spoken to recently have told me they've continually plugged shortfalls in their own pocket for years, and the Minister has advised people to apply for the Horizon Shortfall Scheme, and I sincerely hope that many more people will take advantage of that. I wonder if the Minister will ask the Post Office management to make their records of these payments available to individuals, and have Post Office management let the Minister know yet when they will give an estimate of the excess claimed in Horizon shortfalls from the introduction of the system to the end of the financial year 2019-20. This is important, because all this excess money that wasn't owed was put into Post Office Limited, and management bonuses were paid on profits. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Post Office network is in disarray. Sub-postmasters have no faith in the current management of Post Office Limited to turn things around. What they see is an organisation that's top-heavy, with multiple layers of management and directors who have self-interest at heart. Of course, I'll give way.
An excellent speech, and she's obviously, for obvious reasons, focused on the Horizon scandal that's horrified the country, but the malaise within Post Office management goes much further than that. And for the last 10 years, I've noticed both the closure of many sub-offices, so-called temporary closures, which never reopen, and the loss of town centre post offices, some of which have been there for a century or more. Does she agree that the fundamental duty of the Post Office to run a viable network across the country of the UK, is simply not being fulfilled, and that lies at the door of Post Office management?
Marion, I could not agree with the honourable gentleman more. I have lost 3 post offices in the last year. And not one vacancy has been filled. And it's, as we all know in this place, it's those who are the poorest, the most vulnerable, who regularly use post offices. The network, and will be applying to the Backbench Business Committee for another debate on continuation of the network, because the network is now also includes pick-up and drop-off offices, PUDOs in the vernacular, which actually aren't real post offices, and those who work there are not under post office terms and conditions. They work for Payzone, which is owned by Post Office Limited. The post office network is in disarray, and there's absolutely no faith from postmasters in the current management. And as the Honourable Member has said, all the while the network is crumbling, post offices are closing, sub-postmasters are being asked to take on additional work for less pay, being punished for reducing hours to trying to keep overheads down in the middle of an economic crisis, and seeing their life investment lose value with each subsequent scandal that is uncovered. Lack of sub-postmaster support continues to this day, in stark contrast to the postmaster support policies championed by POL in the briefing they gave me for this debate. I've heard evidence of a recently widowed postmaster who was told by a senior manager that Post Office Limited does not have a roadmap for bereavement, meaning they were left alone without support except from their fellow sub-postmaster. In the same briefing, Post Office Limited outlined they'd increase fees for banking deposits by 20%. As Richard Trinder, chair of the Voice of the Postmaster, put it, 20% of not a lot is still not a lot. Communities are losing a vital social asset, and those that remain are being powered by the altruistic nature of hard-working sub-postmasters, pillars of the community who are running out of energy. In 2012, the societal value of Post Office Limited was estimated to be £2 billion. Does the Minister have an updated figure on this? I don't expect him to answer today. The Minister's announcement that the Government will legislate to exonerate convicted sub-postmasters is welcome. As Lord Arbuthnot said in the other place said, a mass problem requires a mass solution. However, will the Minister commit to changing the governance format that clearly hasn't worked for decades? It's high time for the Government to adopt a new approach, as the current arm's-length governance arrangement has allowed scandal after scandal to fester under the watch of successive Labour, Conservative coalition governments. Sub-postmasters have found themselves essentially subsidising a government-owned network at real cost to themselves. Moreover, when issues arise, they're left to navigate the path to justice on their own. The pressing need for genuine support for those on the front lines is evident. Could the Minister elaborate on the Government's plan for the Post Office network, excluding PUDOs, I have to add? Government oversight has not solved any of the issues of the past, including Horizon. It's the hard work and tireless campaigning of SPMs themselves, journalists such as Nick Wallace and campaigners such as Alan Bates, Christopher Head, the Justice for Sub-Postmasters Alliance, Eleanor Shake, Dan Needle, Tim McCormack, the CWU, Voice of the Postmaster, and the National Federation of Sub-Postmasters, and many members in this place, past and present, that has continued to push the Government on this issue. Will the Minister, on record, please confirm that sub-postmaster organisations such as Voice of the Postmaster and the CWU will no longer be excluded from discussions with Post Office Limited? It's essential that those who power the Post Office network are front and centre of any decision-making process that will carry the Post Office forward. For those who are not aware, the NFSP is financed by Post Office Limited. I am making no judgment on how they perform. in respect of their members, but we need a wider range of postmasters who are going to be consulted on and worked with if we're going to change things going forward. Mr Deputy Speaker, I've seen a rather large list of 23 directors in the senior leadership team at Post Office Limited, not one of which is a Postmaster National Executive Director or Postmaster Experience Director. So when Nick Reid speaks of putting postmasters right at the centre of business, are the Postmaster Director roles simply window dressing? Until postmasters have a say in all levels of the business, the culture won't change. Only recently, a communications director at Post Office Limited, Richard Taylor, was suspended for saying some of them were guilty. That says so much that he felt able to say that publicly. As Bates versus Post Office has shown the nation, it's the hard-working community sub-postmasters that built the trusted reputation and social value of the Post Office over centuries, and it is those within management that pulled it down. If it's to be rebuilt, then the rebuild must be led by those community pillars. Once again, Mr Deputy Speaker, my speech was twice as long, and I know I have probably overran. I had so much more to say. Change has to happen. Change must happen. And the fact that there will be a general election this year, without doubt, must not stand in the way of the change that is so, so needed.
Question is as on the order paper. Ronnie Cowan.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker, for taking me so early on in this debate. We are today debating the Post Office management culture, but I very briefly want to touch on the responsibility that Fujitsu have too, because as I understand the facts, they too are culpable and should be part of any agreed outcome. Fujitsu have a role to play in bringing this sorry tale to a speedy end. Every computer system in the world has the potential to contain bugs. People write the code. Errors happen. The vast majority are tiny. What matters is how those responsible react once an error has been identified. I worked in IT for 35 years, most of which was developing and implementing computer solutions for business problems. We reviewed code, we pored over it, we took pride in doing it, and somebody somewhere at some point was looking at this Horizon system at this particular problem. Why were they looking at that problem? Who directed them to it, and when were they asked to address it? I have, and I don't want to stereotype my fellow software developers, I have a vision in my head of somebody with a brain load of code one morning looking at this problem, and something struck them. They took off their headphones, they put down their 5th cup of coffee of the day and said, "We have got a problem here." Because this is important. In any system worth its salt, the modification to fix that problem will have been documented, and somebody within Fujitsu can say when it was identified, and therefore at what point did they inform the Post Office. And that matters, because when we then know that the Post Office stopped acting out of ignorance and belligerence and started lying to people. Today we have a government which has been in denial. It's as if this isn't a problem of their making, but please correct me if I am wrong. The Post Office is a limited company owned entirely by the UK government. The Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy has a responsibility for postal affairs. The Office of Communications, Ofcom, is the regulator of postal services. Ofcom is a public corporation accountable to Parliament. Can anyone imagine what it's like to be an individual wrongly accused of a crime, humiliated and ridiculed, forced into bankruptcy, and knowing that you are innocent for all these years, while the wider establishment stood back and did nothing? The Post Office proudly boasts At our core, we are a business driven and defined by our social purpose. Well, here's a chance to prove that, and they've failed. Despite the contrition, despite the promises to learn from their mistakes, despite admitting that they got it wrong, despite acknowledging that compensation must be paid, what do we see today? Is the establishment hiding behind very expensive lawyers that I can only presume the taxpayer is paying for. Fortunately, in my life, I rarely bump up against the legal profession in their professional capacity. It's usually been restricted to house moves, and that's confusing enough. The mountains of administration and the perpetual legal speak leave most people gasping for air. What must it be like to be faced by a criminal prosecution that you're innocent of, and now that your innocence is proven, that same force has been utilised to slow down the process that should be working for you to receive compensation? The letter by Professor Chris Hodges, Chair of the Horizon Compensation Advisory Board, which was written to Nick Reid, CEO of the Post Office, and quoted by the Honourable Member for Motherwell and Wishaw, perfectly encapsulates the current situation. And I won't repeat the entire letter, but I would like to repeat a couple of lines. Your reliance of legal argument and legal terminology similarly does not impress us. We do not perceive demonstration of behaviour as anything like a sympathetic understanding towards the people your organisation has harmed. I am not for a minute saying that Post Office do not require legal representation. They certainly do. I am saying the manner in which they engage with the victims of the Horizon scandal is a measure of their concern, contrition and compassion, and they have failed on all three fronts. Crucial, because a successful resolution depends on the mindset of the Post Office management changing. We continually see the citizens of the UK being chewed up by large corporate and government entities. The case of Equitable Life, the Waspy woman, the bloodborne virus scandal and the Post Office Horizon fiasco are just a few. If the citizens of the UK are to have faith in their politicians, then we need to get it right and be on their side, and when big corporations are beating down on them.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Honourable Gentleman for giving way. I would like to get on the record and see what he thinks of being in the original Post Office Review Group. By 2015, there'd been a whistleblower from Fujitsu who'd come forward from the boiler room, as they called it. He'd been altering accounts without the knowledge of the sub-postmasters. The MPs of the review group knew. The investigator, Second Sight, knew, Ron Warmington. The Post Office knew that the convictions were unsafe, and the government knew. Yet it was another 5 years of very expensive litigation against the 555 before justice was seen to be done.
I think it's an ongoing example of how, historically, the government of the day thought they could weather this storm and get away with it. And what I'm saying today is that the UK government has to be part of the solution. To be part of the problem, to continue to be part of the problem, is unacceptable. And finally, Mr Deputy Speaker, the UK government must act swiftly to ensure that all innocent victims have their convictions quashed and that the correct and acceptable compensation is paid. Anything else is an extension of the ongoing miscarriage of justice that innocent men and women have been subjected to because of the hubris of the Post Office and the UK governments past and present.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. This debate today is extremely timely. It's extremely important. It's quite harrowing, isn't it, when you listen to cases from across the country, from across the UK, and it takes a little bit of sinking in, I think, to realise how this cover-up, how this scandal has cost the lives of ordinary, hard-working people who only wanted to provide for their family through working for the communities in the post offices. And we've got to think about how many of these people have been treated, not just by the post office, by the government, it's by Fujitsu, it's by the post office. Because many of these people had extreme difficulties in employment. And they will not just betrayed. Many of them, you know, sent to prison for crimes they didn't commit. They knew they were innocent. But you know what's more important? The people that sent them there knew they were innocent as well. And there's got to be a lot of answers, and there's more and more coming to the fore every day with regard to this absolute scandal. I mean, it's been mentioned. Who knew about this? The government knew about it. Fujitsu knew about it. The post office knew about it. Yet they still sent investigators in to sub-postmasters and sub-postmistresses, post offices, investigated people, charged people, and devastated people's lives. They acted like the Gestapo. They turned up on the day and closed closed post offices down. No, that's the culture. That's a post office management culture, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and it needs to be addressed. I'm not sure, you know, how you can compensate anybody. How can you compensate a woman or a man or the family who committed suicide as a result of the pressure that they were put under by the government, the post office, the investigators, as a result of what was happening? How do you compensate anybody for that? How do you compensate the death of a loved one who was the breadwinner in the family, who decided the only option was to take their own life?
Yeah, driven to despair.
It's unimaginable. We cannot put ourselves in their shoes, Mr. Deputy Speaker. What about the people who went to prison? Men and women. Because of supposedly falsifying accounts, because of theft. And they're in prison with child killers, with rapists, for things that they hadn't done. And not only did they know they hadn't done it, the government knew they hadn't done it. The post office knew they hadn't done it. Fujitsu knew what was happening behind the scenes. You know, this doesn't really seem like the country I'm very, very proud of in what happens with the government behind the scenes. It's very, very murky, very, very sinister. And again, whilst at the same time, the government and the post office were prosecuting people with evidence from Fujitsu, people were being imprisoned, people were taking their own lives. It's quite frankly, it's enough to make you cry, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Of course I will.
I'm very grateful to give you away. He's making a typically impassioned speech, quite rightly. I've been very careful throughout the whole time I've been involved in this, which is over 4 years as a backbencher and a frontbencher, that we have not played any kind of party politics with that. Can I just put on record, this is a series of governments, happened both Labour governments and coalition governments and the current government, where some of these issues have occurred. It's very important that we look at this on a cross-party basis and seek to resolve it as such. And I'm very keen to work with him on that basis.
Thanks for that intervention, and I agree with the Minister. I've got a lot of time for the Minister, and I've had conversations with regard to this and many other things with the Minister. And I haven't, as you'll notice, and you can look in Hansard, I haven't said, I haven't been party political. I've basically said the government. And the Minister correctly points out there's been governments of different colours throughout the period of time. But it's the government. Of course, you've just come in, but of course I will.
very good points, as did the members for Inverclyde and Motherwell and Wishaw before. And all of us who've been here for a while share all the feelings that all three of those members have expressed so far in terms of the horror, the great anxiety and the cases that some of us are dealing with. But would he also agree with me that there are roughly, I think, 3,000 people working in Post Office Limited, including all those working in the Crown Post Offices, like the one in my constituency of Gloucester. And it's very important that we try and separate out in our minds, before we know precisely from the inquiry where guilt lies, where there will be charges and prosecutions to come, that we don't label everybody within Post Offices Limited within the accusations that quite rightly are being laid before the House today.
I heard what the Honourable Gentleman said. I also heard the Chairman of Ways and Means admonition of another Honourable Member earlier. Difference in this case is that the Honourable Gentleman was in fact here for the start of the Honourable Gentleman's speech. That said, I personally believe that there is a prerequisite for members, whenever they can, to be in from the start of debate, to hear the whole debate. Mr. Lavery.
Thanks for that. The Honourable Gentleman makes a valid point. There isn't anything I've said up till now criticises everyone in the post office. We've got some fantastic employees in the post office. I'm not going to say the same thing, by the way, about the management or the executive team in the post office. I refuse to accept that things have changed, because the management culture within the post office hasn't changed one iota. But I agree that we've got to look forward and take the post office forward. And there's lots of people, I mentioned the fact that that there might be charges in the future, there might not be charges in the future. People might get charged. There's been too many people charged already. And the real reason behind this investigation, this scandal, this Horizon scandal, is as a result of people being sent to prison, people being traumatised, people's lives being destroyed, kids, men and women having their lives destroyed because people knew there was something happening at the post office. I sit on the select committee, and we had the chief executive of the post office. He's been here, been to the House a couple of times. And I've got to be honest, he shows no remorse whatsoever. And believes because he wasn't there at the time, then that's right. And this man, this individual, I think his wage is around about £344,000 a year. And I asked him, I says, why are you getting a bonus in excess of £145,000 in addition to your three? And what makes you so special? And he couldn't answer. And this is at a time when people have suffered so greatly. And the post office even now, and the government even now, are reluctant to address a lot of people who have suffered as a consequence of this scandal. And I'll come on to that very shortly, Mr. Deputy Speaker, with regard to who's been missed in this compensation. There's 3 packages, and I've had a chat with, I want to say, my honourable friend, why not, about this very, very issue. Because I've got 3 examples which are heartbreaking, and currently my understanding is it'll be very difficult for these individuals to claim any compensation whatsoever. The culture hasn't changed. There's always been a serious cultural problem in the post office, and that obviously came to the fore with the abuse of power, which was blatantly displayed during the Horizon scandal. But this hasn't changed, and as I mentioned before, the management structure the governance, the cultures largely remain unreformed. We've got people in post offices now suffering greatly because of low wages. They haven't got the wages from the post office to make ends meet. Again, mainly in news agents, in other types of spa shops, etc., things like that. And they're struggling at the same time, as I mentioned before, the post office executives are being awarded bonuses of tens, if not hundreds, of thousands of pounds. And of course that's got to be looked at. It really has got to be looked at. And there was, and it's been suggested, and the Minister will be aware, it's been suggested, that the bonuses, a lot of the bonuses that's been paid, refer to progress with regard to the Horizon scandal. How can you get a bonus? How can anybody get it? Is a bonus not supposed to be for the additional production or, good work for it? How can a chief executive get hundreds of thousands of pounds bonus? Why is this happening? And who do you blame for that? We've got to look at how and these remuneration packages are set up and in whose benefit. We cannot have people making hundreds of thousands of pounds in one hand and bonuses of like 10 times of what the ordinary post sub master or sub post mistress or indeed the workers themselves are getting. It's just not correct. And bonuses shouldn't be paid for failure. And that's what's happening within the
right honourable gentleman on that point.
Yep.
I thank you for giving way. Is he aware that on investigation the Horizon system had a suspense account? A suspense account in an accounting package is where you put transactions before you allot them properly. At the end of every year, most years, there was over £1 million retained in the suspense account, which was kept for 4 years and then added back to profit and never resolved.
Not only that, the reality is Joe Hamilton, who had to pay £25,000 back, even though she knew she was in the right. Ask Nick Reid, the chief executive of the post office, if indeed the money she paid back, or the money that was paid back by a number of the people employed at the time, a number of the victims, is there a possibility that finance, their fines, their repayments, would have been in a place where it could have provided bonuses for the senior executives? How perverse is that? How perverse is that? And the answer from the chief executive, when I pressed them, he said that yes, that is a possibility. Yes, it is. But he didn't know where the money had actually went to. And I think that in itself is so bad, it beggars belief. But when we look at Fujitsu, they denied, not only did Fujitsu deny any knowledge of bugs or any wrongdoing, they actually knew quite the opposite. And they supplied evidence to the post office to prosecute individuals. I mean, how bad is it? How bad is this situation? Again, this isn't like a spy movie. It's worse than a spy movie. We had a dark room in Fujitsu where we had members or employees of Fujitsu communicating with the computer systems, the Horizon system, in post offices up and down the country. They denied it all along and said that it was impossible that it could ever happen. These people who were in there changing the amounts of money openly. The government knew, Fujitsu knew because they had the operation in their own offices and employees, changing facts and figures in accounts of ordinary, hard-working individuals. Again, spy movie stuff, of course it is. It really is. It's unbelievable that that could be the case. And isn't it unreal to think that none of this would have come about if there hadn't have been the ITV dramatisation? Mr. Bates versus the post office. This wouldn't, we wouldn't be discussing it here because it would have been kicked into the long grass. The people who were in prison would be, would have been suffering the same as the families that have been destroyed, the kids that have had the upbringing with the criticism, the abuse that their parents were thieves basically. That wouldn't have been unearthed. Yes.
Very grateful. I mean, there's no doubt about it. The ITV series has heightened awareness, both in this House and further afield, quite rightly, and I welcome that. But there was much work going on in this space before that series was aired, including on how we can overturn more convictions on a blanket basis. That's something I've been working on the advisory board on before that series was aired. It's not right to say we wouldn't have got to this position. We probably wouldn't have got to this position as quickly, but absolutely, he must surely concede there's absolutely work been going on this for years, but I welcome the fact it's happening more rapidly now.
For that clarity and clarification, and forgive me if I suggested that nothing at all had happened, because I know that the Minister has been working on it. I know that the Parliamentary group, my honourable friend from Motherwell and Wishaw, and others have been working assiduously with regard to this. But you make the point, the Minister makes a point, that it might not have been at this stage at what it is at this moment in time. We might not have gotten Fujitsu to come out and say, yes, for the first time, we're sorry. It might not have been the case where the post office like started to admit that they had wrongful or unsafe prosecutions. But we are where we are. And again, I wouldn't want to try and mislead anyone in this debate. I've got just three brief examples. And Minister, these are people who were heavily involved with Horizon, with the post office at the time, who have suffered greatly. I've got a real heartbreaker, to be honest. The first one is a lady from my constituency who sadly passed on. And they didn't come to see me until they saw the ITV documentary. And the lady's husband simply cried for the entire hour I was sitting with him. He wanted justice for his wife, Janine, and she sadly died. She died of COVID, and he's hoping for some sort of justice now. The case is this. Janine worked for a newsagent, and the newsagents employed her in the post office, which was in the newsagents, which is regular. It's the sort of thing that happens up and down the country. But in a contract with the newsagents, it said any shortfall in finances must be made, with the post office, must be made by yourself. She was employed by the newsagent. Another person employed by the newsagent, and then you had the sub-postmaster stroke mistress, I'm not sure what it was on this account. And what happened was, Janine was accused of stealing £25,000. She hadn't seen that amount of money before. And she was accused of stealing that money. The investigators came in from the post office into the newsagents and basically threatened her like a common thief. The pressure was put on, we're going to charge you with theft and you're going to prison. And she was absolutely devastated. She accepted that if she paid, she pleaded guilty. And then she sat back and realised, why should I be pleading guilty when I'm not guilty? And it cost her a small fortune, her and her family, to take the case back to court and rescind the guilty verdict. The post office then said that, okay, if you accept false accounting, then and pay the money back, then that will be the lesser charge. She refused. The post office then said if you pay the £25,000, it had cost her, Mr Deputy Speaker, it cost her £15,000 in legal fees, and these are just ordinary working people in the community. So she was informed if she paid the £25,000 back, then they would drop the charges. And that's what happened. So she paid the money back. And unfortunately, till the day she sadly passed on, her and her family lost everything they had. And that needs scrutiny. We need to look at the management culture. How on earth during this sort of thing was the post office? Whoever directed these investigators into the post offices and treat them the way they were treated, and they had the investigations, the way they were, and they knew at the time that it was false, man. That's the thing that I've reiterated and continue to reiterate. They knew these allegations were false and unfounded, unfair in many ways. Maybe it's not the investigators did, but certainly people at the top of the post office knew. People in government knew. It cannot be right. And as such, Minister Janine, who her husband wrote a really heart-rending letter, and he submitted it. But under the current schemes, is unlikely to be able to claim any money. How can that be just? But I will follow this up with the Minister. Yeah. The second one, Mr Deputy Speaker, is a man who wrote to us, and he says, I've got a massive problem. And he says, I'm like lots of other sub-post masters and sub-post mistresses where we worked in the heart of the community. We were at the very heart of the community. It's where people used to come and talk and discuss, and we were trusted, we were well respected, we were listened to, and as a result, he was seeing mistake after mistake cropping up on his computer week after week. But rather than inform the post office, he was putting money in week by week by week to balance the accounts, which had been altered by somebody in Fujitsu head office. This individual, he says that he just simply couldn't think, he couldn't stand the fact that anybody would think that he was in the slightest, in the remote, a thief. But he's paid thousands, tens of thousands of pounds when you aggregate the money up on a week-by-week basis. And there isn't any way that him, and I would think hundreds of other employees would have got the opportunity or the ability to claim compensation at this moment in time. And it begs a question whether the post office, together with the government, can actually write to every single sub-postmaster who were between, I think, 1998 and now, and ask if they're aware of anyone who was employed who might have put their own money out their own backside pocket, their family savings, into balancing the accounts. And then, if they did, then there should be some consideration, Minister, for some real compensation for individuals such as that. Because the Post Office will have the details. The Post Office will have all the details of people who work there and people who have claimed that they've used finances from their own back pockets. And the last one I'll just briefly mention, I haven't actually seen the individuals. They're coming to see us next week. I got told of one of the relations that they were involved in the Horizon scandal. They paid, I think the sum crops up time and time again, £25,000. They paid £25,000 just to save their name. Nothing went to court. Nothing happened, but they paid the money despite the fact that they were innocent. And because they paid the money, they basically thought it would go away. Very little opportunity for people like them to actually reclaim finances. And remember, these people, that it's unfair. It's basically, never mind them stealing money off the Post Office. It's a Post Office stealing money of hard-working individual people, and that should be recognised. So it would be helpful, I think, Mr. Deputy Speaker, if the Post Office and the government could come up to listen to what other people have got to say. It's not just those who were convicted, not just those who were prosecuted. There'll be more who weren't convicted, not prosecuted, actually out of pocket. Lots of their lives destroyed as a consequence of the Post Office / Horizon scandal. So we need to look at how that can be addressed. They deserve compensation. I think my honourable friend, the member for Motherwell and Wishaw, said before, it's appalling, it's disgraceful, it's shameful, and I think she said it's a stain on all of us. We've got the opportunity, Minister, and I agree what you said before. This is cross-party. We've got the opportunity to put this right. Let's do it. Let's look after the people whose only crime was going to work and looking after their families.
Sarah Green.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. May I begin by thanking the Honourable Member for Motherwell and Wishaw for securing today's debate. This has been a shocking and heartbreaking sequence of events. Nobody could fail to be moved by the testimonies of the countless families affected by this scandal. I would like to focus on one specific issue today, and that is the pervasive use of non-disclosure agreements by Post Office management. And I heard the Minister's intervention about them, and I think it's worth highlighting their use as part of the management culture at the Post Office. The more things come to light, the more shocking and pernicious this particular aspect is. For example, a recent report by the Financial Times highlighted the distressing case of Martin Griffiths. He managed a post office for 18 years before tragically taking his life after spending £100,000 of his own money to meet accounting shortfalls. Post office lawyers apparently offered his widow a settlement in exchange for her silence about the circumstances surrounding her husband's death. Frankly, that's appalling. And the Prime Minister himself, responding to a question in this chamber just a few weeks ago, stated that the ability to speak out about things is key to unlocking justice. Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, last month I was contacted by a constituent who worked for the Post Office for over 3 decades. He only grasped there was an issue, and indeed the scale of it, when a journalist got in touch about Horizon after he retired. He was, however, unable to agree to be interviewed because he is tied to a non-disclosure agreement that he signed when he retired from the Post Office. Together with the Official Secrets Act he signed when he joined the Post Office, he has effectively been gagged. And in his own words, he told me, as a member of the Post Office project team that delivered Horizon, I, like many of my ex-project colleagues, was aware of the truth behind many of the points that the Post Office have been at great pains to hide or deny. The Post Office were very careful to ensure that their employees with links to Horizon were unaware of how the system was operating or the volume of sub-postmasters that were being prosecuted. He also said, I am still staggered that someone at a senior level didn't question the huge rise in prosecutions after the system was implemented. The Post Office have used these non-disclosure agreements to ensure that current and ex-employees are effectively silenced. If not tied by these agreements, it is possible that information would have been available to those inquiring about the scandal much earlier in the process. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I spoke to him again yesterday, and his sense of frustration was palpable. He knew, for example, that Fujitsu had remote access to live Horizon terminals. He shared a host of other details too, which begged the question, how much sooner could this have come to light had people like my constituent not been gagged? Of course, it's entirely understandable why people like him have felt unable to speak out. To do so would risk not only prosecution for criminal offence, but also the possibility of the Post Office seeking recovery of monies paid for things like voluntary redundancy. As he currently feels unable to speak out openly, I'd like to close by giving my constituent the final word. He said, I understand that a company needs the ability to protect its valid business interests and the interests of its clients. However, the non-disclosure agreements should not be so restricting to avoid malpractice being reported or to allow the company to blatantly lie when under investigation. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Jim Shannon.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, it's a pleasure to speak in this debate. And can I commend the Honourable Lady for Motherwell and Wishaw for setting the scene so well. In the contribution of the Honourable Lady, she touched upon everything. I'm here quite simply, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to support the Honourable Lady, but also to make the case for justice, for the right decisions to be made, and for fairness and equality, which has been missing in this process. The Honourable Lady has endeavoured vigorously, evangelically even, to pursue this matter, and has done that with a zest that I believe that we all recognise, and many others as well. Can I thank the others who have made contributions as well, and indeed the honourable member who just spoke beforehand as well for their contributions. As a rural constituency MP, the role of the Post Office in my community is vital. So when we look at management culture, we have to look at the role of the Post Office. What does it achieve, and does it achieve and is it achieving what we see? We have no bank branches left in the rural community. We have no hole in the walls, that we refer to them, that are free of charges. And all we have to do, our rural banking and lift pensions, is the post offices. Therefore, the role of the post office in the rural communities that I represent in Strangford are so critical. So this debate today is one of immense interest for me in particular. Can I maybe start as well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, by commending the Minister. I think every one of us in this House, I know that I can say this personally, but I think others will say the same. He has worked industriously behind backs for some 2 years, probably longer I suspect, in relation to this here. He did that. The Minister did the spade work and the footwork and endeavoured to ensure that we got to where we were. Mr. Bates against the Post Office on TV was a programme that highlighted it very, very visually for us all to understand it better. But there's always a person who has to sow the seed, and then there's a person who reaps the harvest. And I say to the Minister that his hard work to sowing the seed, and today as Minister hopefully reaping the harvest, I think is a recognition of the endeavours that he has made. I say that very honestly, Mr Deputy Speaker, because I think we all recognise in this House that his heart was always to have justice, always to have fair play, and today I think this debate gives us a chance to air those things, so thank him for that. With the drive in the post offices towards online banking, our older and vulnerable people have been left behind. So when it comes to management culture, where are they considered? Particularly those who don't have a good mobile signal, broadband pockets in the rural areas, meaning that the reliable internet connection that you and I take for granted is not at their fingertips. So never mind the ability to use online facilities, there just isn't even the opportunity to do so. Therefore, the local post office, with the trustworthy staff who can help you to do what you need to do, becomes even more essential. So when it comes to management culture, Mr Deputy Speaker, we have to have a post office that actually works the way that we all wish to see. Post offices really are a lifeline, not simply in terms of meeting the financial gap left by the banks in their mass exodus from the rural communities, but also in terms of social engagement and contact. I was adding up there, I think I've had 11 banks have closed in my constituency over the last number of years. Most of them in the rural community, one or two in the towns, but most of them in the rural community. To know that they can keep, for the only person in the post office, to know they can keep their, I use this word, the wee routine of lifting their money or paying their electric or gas bill, or the list of other things that can be accomplished in the post office without having to get on a bus or even two buses to come to one of the major towns to carry out their business. What grieves me greatly, Mr Deputy Speaker, I said in the intervention to the Honourable Lady from Motherwell and Wishaw, is those who have lost their lives, those who have done prison terms, as the Honourable Gentleman for Wansbeck referred to as well, Wansbeck referred to, and to me, I see the grief, the anxiety, and all those people, Mr Deputy Speaker, all those people were good people, honest people, hard-working, sincere, never probably had a parking ticket in their life or anything else, and they suddenly find themselves on the front row of discredit, of disappointment, their whole lives destroyed, their relationships, their health. Those people deserve to be compensated, deserve to be have their lives reinstated, and all the things that happened to them to many ways, but monetary as well. The compensation has to be adequate. So those who lost their reputation, those who honest, hard-working people who had their lives destroyed. With this being the case, it is essential that sub-postmasters and mistresses are supported in their role by the post office in their management culture role. The Horizon scheme is a very big indication that the culture is not good, wasn't good, is not good, and has to improve. And not simply because of a defunct system and scheme, but because of the lack of trust and support given to those people who had done nothing other than offer a service. And the morale within the post office is at an all-time low. And the question is, how does government fix this? And management as well, some of those people have been destitute, had their lives destroyed entirely, and it has to be addressed. So how do we, Mr Deputy Speaker, how do we convince younger men and women to take up the gauntlet of the post office? The three post offices had closed, and the Honourable Lady from Motherwell and Wishaw, there's nobody taking those up. And we know why there's no one taking them up, because the monetary value or the wages they can receive is of such a minimum quality. So we need to look at that when it comes to the issues of how we move forward within the management culture to make sure that post offices, by their very nature, can be ones that they can take on. When all around them are horror stories of how staff are treated and just how horribly underpaid they are, who in goodness name, Mr Deputy Speaker, would take on a role in a post office for a less than minimum wage? And all the worry. Oh my goodness. I've read of postmasters working out that when the time taken to carry out the functions required by the post office was taken into consideration, that they were on less than a minimum wage. That's where they are. So I think today's debate has to also address that within the management culture. We have to incentivise and make it a job it's worth doing, and for those who put their reputation on the line to do that. This cannot be acceptable, and to see bosses, I understand people getting bonuses, I understand the reasons for it, but when people are getting bonuses while other people are being disadvantaged financially and under all sorts of destitution and lives destroyed. I cannot understand that. So I do have to express some concern that some bosses have been receiving, I use the word adulation and accolades, whilst they get less than the minimum wage would not entice them to take on a post office or entice others to join the ranks. I conclude with this, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I would suggest that in any discussion on management of the culture of the post office, that there needs to be serious cognizance of how to rebuild trust from this stage, and that will start with honest and open communication and the decision to work with the post office staff at every level. I think a wrong has been done, it has to be righted. If it does, and I know the Minister is committed to that, and we support the Minister, and the Minister is right, and the Honourable Gentleman for Wansbeck and everyone else here is right. We support the Minister and what he does simply because he's seeking justice, the justice that we all want for our constituents. I commend him for it, and I look forward to his reply at a later stage. Mr. Deputy Speaker, thank you so much.
Thompson. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It's a great pleasure to follow the Honourable Member for Strangford. I thank and commend my honourable friend, the Member for Motherwell and Wishaw, on securing today's debate. I mean, I know that she has worked on this and effectively post office issues from the minute she set foot in this place in 2015, and her efforts, and many other honourable members who have spent many years trying to raise the issues around this subject, are finally getting the deserved attention they required and actually seeing the redress for those who have been caught up in it. I think in many ways she's our very own Madam Post Offices, which I know she's going to hit me for later, but that's okay. But yeah, I mean, this is a really, really important issue, and I think it shows that when injustices are brought to light, it is possible that they can be addressed. It maybe never be as quickly as we might want it to be done. It may never be exactly how we want it to be done, but when we all come together, it can be done. And I think this sort of the fact that we had to wait for a TV documentary to speed up the process is unfortunate, but at least it is there. And I do commend the Minister for the efforts and the actions that he's personally taken in driving this forward, because I know he has, and that's coming from a genuine place. It's a genuine recognition where we won't just oppose for the sake of opposing. When something's done right, I think it's important we make that point. But by now we're all sadly too familiar with the details of this chapter in British history, and indeed the infamy of it. Hundreds of working people had their lives ruined, and still nobody really has yet been held accountable. Now I know that there's inquiries underway, but really we're still waiting for that accountability to come forward, with more than 900 sub-postmasters and postmistresses prosecuted for being accused of stealing money because of incorrect information provided by a failed Horizon computer system. My honourable friend, the Member for Inverclyde, highlighted issues around Fujitsu and the responsibilities that company might have. But within that, I think we also need to ask what questions were being asked by the Post Office themselves when issues in the system were first brought to light, and why is it, or were questions being asked, or were they just simply dismissed, and why is it that had questions been asked that didn't necessarily result in much quicker addressing the issues that were being raised. So I think there's still very serious questions that are requiring answers, and I think there's some very serious answers required from Fujitsu. Just in the last few weeks, and I know others have done the same, but I've written to the CEO of Fujitsu to urge him to take a step forward to help the corporation to come forward and accept their responsibility for their part in this debacle. I mean, it would be only right that they actually hold their hands up and accept that responsibility, and in the spirit of openness and transparency, and indeed, dare I say, honour, that company actually recognise the part that they've played. The Honourable Member for Wansbeck talked about injustices, and I think it is important that where there is an injustice like this, that we all get behind it. Now, of course, this is only one of several injustices that we are currently dealing with, be it Grenfell, be it infected blood, be it Partygate, Hillsborough, or indeed, just to plug my own bill, the miners' strike pardons bill, I would encourage all members to support. But where we do see injustices, I think it's important that we do come together to address them and tackle them the head on. And I share the concerns of the Honourable Member for Chesham and Amersham and the use of NDAs by Post Office, because when we are trying to get to the bottom of a scandal like this, we need to have as much information as possible. And I think that the Minister's very direct intervention on that point is very helpful to, I think, all of us in making sure that we are very clear in understanding that any members who have got postmasters or mistresses who have concerns about coming forward can have that direct assurance from the Minister that they will be able to do so without fear of that coming back on them. Every day, I think and I know everyone in the Chamber will see the part that post offices play in our local communities, and I know that my own post offices, Midlothian, do a phenomenal job. And it's that central part of the community, I think, that makes this issue feel so strong for so many of us, because these are hearts of many of our communities who've been let down by a management structure that simply tried to brush aside concerns, brush aside complaints. And I'm still waiting to see if there is actually the change that we all hope there has been. The shift in culture, that there does still seem to be some concern that hasn't necessarily been entirely changed, and we certainly hear that there are still currently submasters closing businesses because of present terms are insufficient to make it worthwhile for them. So what is the Minister going to do to further push the Post Office, just because a fundamental culture shift? I mean, some of the issues that arose in this Horizon scandal were even named after Scottish towns. We've had the Dolmellington bug and the Calendar Square bug. I mean, these were not issues that were unseen, unheard. They were flagged to the extent of being named after individual towns. So it does beg the question, how could we have got to that place without action being taken sooner? All of these tragedies show again that the cards are stacked very heavily against the ordinary working person, and sadly it sometimes does take something like an ITV documentary to bring that into the wider public awareness. And I just hope that the lessons that we can hopefully learn through this process to instigate a culture shift in the management of the Post Office, but wider than that, to actually make sure that where concerns like this are raised, that we don't simply see them pushed aside by whatever colour of government it happens to be, that they're actually taken on board in the way that the Minister is doing on this issue, and that we can expect that Parliament and governments can actually address injustices where we come across them and restore faith in many, because I think too often it's the negative headlines that come out of this place that catch the attention of the public, and actually on a subject like this, we're seeing where it's possible to actually do the right thing, as I say, albeit that it can sometimes take a lot longer than we might have otherwise hoped. So with that, Mr Deputy Speaker, again commend my honourable friend, the member for Motherwell and Wishaw, on all her work, and all the other members of the all-party group and members who over many years have contributed to trying to get to the bottom of this issue in all of their work, and hope that we can very swiftly move to a place where this is a historical fact that has been resolved.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I want to also start off by thanking the Honourable Member for Motherwell and Wishaw for all her work, and also her parliamentary or party group. And we are all across the House grateful for those members across the different parties who were the first to spot this scandal and doggedly campaigned to bring it on the government's agenda, as well as the parts of the media agenda, which has of course been amplified by the recent television series. And I also want to thank other members who joined that group, both across this House and the other House, to continue to campaign for many years. And as has been stated today and on many other occasions in this House, this scandal is one of the greatest miscarriages of justice in this country. We are now over 2 decades in this scandal with limited progress and hope or justice for the victims, though some considerable work in recent months has been taken forward, and I commend the Minister for his work, both from the backbench as well as the front bench, in doing what he can to address the injustices. The wrongly accused sub-postmasters have had to endure unjust prison sentences, family breakdowns, homelessness, bankruptcy, health consequences, ostracisation from their communities, and worse. That is also to say nothing of the mental health toll and stress they have all carried while knowing they have been wrongly convicted. As of the 10th of August 2023, the Post Office Horizon IT inquiry and court cases have heard that at least 60 sub-postmasters have died without seeing justice or receiving compensation. And tragically, at least 4 took their own lives. As many members have rightly and powerfully shared today, the impact of this scandal, is horrifying and wide-reaching. And I do not think any of us can truly understand the scale of what the victims have suffered. The Honourable Member for Motherwell and Wishaw powerfully highlighted how the toxic management culture is, and now this culture continues to be alive and present. She highlighted the scandal of the lack of openness and transparency and the spectre of some 40 management staff still continuing to be in post who have been there since the scandal began. And I hope the Minister can address from his own insights what is happening with those who continue to remain in management positions, because it cannot be possible or right that this continues. And if we do want to see a culture change, it would be helpful to understand how the Minister thinks that can happen when those who've been involved and present in the management at the time can take part in the reform process. Mr. Deputy Speaker, many of those affected by the scandal remain trapped in a limbo without closure or justice. Among many of the victims, there is limited faith in our justice system for the very reasons we've heard about in numerous debates and the Minister is well aware of. Since this became common knowledge, the public too have lost faith in the system. People are shocked and upset. They want change, and we must work hard to repair this distrust and damage that has been done. And of course, whatever we can do across parties to achieve that is vital if we are to make sure these scandals don't happen in the future. The Honourable Member for Inverclyde highlighted the appalling role of Fujitsu in the Horizon scandal. He rightly pointed out that the crisis could have been mitigated if those early IT problems were recognised, addressed properly, rather than not faced up to. My honourable friend, the member for Wansbeck, spoke passionately about the failure of the management and executive team at the Post Office. He highlighted the scale of the injustice and trauma victims have endured and continue to endure. They have been let down at every turn, and we need the government to act with urgency, the urgency that is desperately needed. The member for Chesham and Amersham spoke about the horrific way in which non-disclosure notices agreements have been used, silencing victims through non-disclosure notices, as she has described in relation to her constituents, cannot be allowed to happen because it added to the injustice of what her constituent and her husband faced. This prolonged the time it took to expose the scandal. So lessons need to be learned. We recognise the inquiry will highlight through its conclusions the lessons that government needs to draw on, as well as others. The member for Strangford spoke of the vital importance of improving the culture of the Post Office as we look to the future in what the post office can provide for communities up and down the country, and especially in rural communities. And as we have seen the bank closures around the country, the need for banking services and other services. So it's important that we work to ensure that the future of the post office is one that's fit for purpose, that there is never a scandal of this nature, and that it is properly worked through how we reform the post office for the good of citizens and the good of communities. And in that spirit, I hope the Minister will be able to tell us how he proposes, how he sees that future, and the role of communities and the role of those who have seen how things can go so badly wrong, so that their insights are built into how we shape the future of the post office, and of course the role of the key trade unions. Last month, the Secretary of State sacked the chair of the Post Office, Henry Staunton, stating that given all of the difficulties the Post Office is having, it's not just about Horizon, it's about the entire business model, how we make it work, and we needed someone who could chair a board that was able to deal with these things. Mr. Staunton was appointed in December 2022, so was not the chair of the Post Office during the key years of the scandal. In the debate, the Minister said that some of the past conduct and culture of the Post Office has changed, but that we know that it needs to change further. I'd be grateful if the Minister could outline what he believes has changed already in the culture of the Post Office and what steps he is taking to make sure that further changes take place, and what the timeline should be in terms of seeing that reform process. And I hope that the appointment of the new chair can be a clear marker and in terms of the steps forward in altering fundamentally the culture and management of the Post Office. During the High Court case of Bates versus Post Office Limited, it was stated that there seems to be a culture of secrecy and excessive confidentiality generally within the Post Office, but particularly focused on Horizon. This culture of management has been affirmed by numerous testimonies. Many of the victims of the scandal spoke of the fear they felt at approaching Wednesdays, the day where they, the sub-postmasters, had to balance their accounts. And we've heard from honourable members from their testimonies of the experiences of their constituents, sub-postmasters who are their constituents, of the terror that they faced when they were faced with these issues, not because it was their fault, but because of the failure of the Horizon system and the failure of the Post Office management. The Fujitsu whistleblower Nate Oro last week revealed how he, along with fellow staff at the Fujitsu call centre, would also approach Wednesdays with dread. They knew to expect the barrage of desperate calls of sub-postmasters whose livelihoods and lives were being snatched from them. Mr. Oro said that despite Fujitsu staff knowing that the software clearly had faults, they would be punished by leadership for sharing any of their doubts with the sub-postmasters. To have this constantly faced every week and silencing of staff across the organisation is hardly a sign of good management. These are the things we need to prevent. The former Post Office Chief Executive, Paula Venables, as we've heard, will be giving evidence to the public inquiry. It's really crucial that provides the evidence, provides clarity on what happened, and that serious lessons are learned. It's also vital that we recognise that when senior management failure happens, early intervention takes place to tackle them. And lessons need to be learnt from the experience of the action or inaction that took place by the department that was responsible and those institutions that are responsible for oversight of the Post Office. It's important to also draw on lessons in terms of parliamentary scrutiny. Could more have been done to ensure that there was greater scrutiny? In terms of the lessons that we need to consider, should there be early warning systems within Whitehall to spot issues when members of Parliament raise these issues or when cases are brought to ministers through officials? It is too often the case that individual cases don't get the attention that they deserve in Whitehall, and lessons will need to be learnt on that front too, working with members of Parliament so that we can build a clearer picture of patterns that emerge and delays don't take place before a major scandal is exposed. Mr. Deputy Speaker, as we consider the future of the Post Office, given all that has happened and reported and uncovered about this scandal over 2 decades, there is rightly huge distrust, horror and dismay at the Post Office management and at the Post Office as an employer. Despite the hard-working and dedicated work of sub-postmasters across the country and all other staff, this scandal has made the role synonymous with being victims of injustice. The Citizens Advice Bureau reported that over 200 post offices have closed in the last 2 years, and that 1,291 post offices are currently deemed temporarily closed, but over half of these have been shut for more than 2 years. Post offices provide a broad range of services where communities can access cash, pay bills, deliver and receive mail, and they often act as a hub for communities. This is by no means an exhaustive list of their positive role and impact to our country. High streets have already been facing years of decline, and post offices closing down is a key service that leaves a gaping hole in our communities. Labour has pledged to stop the decline of high streets and bring much-needed services back to communities. Many post offices provide crucial banking services, as has been mentioned, for communities. Labour will accelerate the rollout of banking hubs to protect this service and help people deposit and take out cash, as well as get support and help with wider banking services. I hope the Minister can provide further updates, as I said, on how his department will reform the Post Office and how there will be wide consultation, including with the many unions and local players, to ensure that we have an appropriate service for the future. The scale of the Post Office management failing is seismic. This scandal has instilled distrust in the Post Office, in public contracts, and most worryingly in our judicial system. So I hope the Minister will be able to set out what action he and his government, because this requires a cross-governmental role too, will work to reform the Post Office and seek to restore trust in our system so that these scandals don't happen again. He's heard about the numerous scandals that have come to pass, not just the Horizon scandal. And can the Minister provide a further update on the wider independent review of governance around the Post Office decisions on remuneration? And also, another issue that came to the fore is the fact that there were concerns about racism within the way post offices, within the way that some of the actions took place by the management and some of the language and classification that was used in terms of racist classifications, which the Post Office said that it would investigate. I would be grateful if the Minister could look at that and provide any updates on that. And finally, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful to all colleagues across the House for the tireless work they've done over many years, as well as in the other House, in highlighting this scandal and the dogged determination with which debates have been used to continue to keep the pressure on ministers. And we will all continue to do everything we can to ensure justice is done. Thank you.
Minister, Kevin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I first of course, pay tribute to Honourable Lady the Member for Motherwell, Wishaw, for securing this debate, but also her very fine work as always on the All-Party Group for Post Offices, and indeed the Backbench Business Committee for bringing forward this debate. Can I also pay tribute to all the members of this House, and indeed the other place, for the work they've done on this particular issue. I promised the Honourable Lady that the Shadow Minister, I don't need anybody to hold my feet to the fire, but it's good that we have got this momentum, and I very much appreciate the work that's been done by many. And there's many kind words from a number of contributors in terms of my work, but my work was a bit part compared to many others, and I know that many others have campaigned long and hard on this particular issue, as have people outside this place, of course, members of the legal profession and members of the media, many of whom we know are very familiar people associated with this scandal and the great work they have done in terms of bringing it to light. In terms of the particular issue around governance, I'm very fond of a quote by Emerson, who said that an institution is the lengthened shadow of a single man. So I'm very keen to make sure that the management culture of the Post Office is in the right place. A positive management culture is paramount for the health of any organisation, so I very much welcome the opportunity that today's debate brings to consider this particular point. The Post Office scandal is one of course, the biggest miscarriage of justice in living history, and the victims must get the justice they deserve. I do believe today's Post Office is different from the past, but restoring trust will take time, and that does not mean that we are satisfied with the situation currently. This will never be about quick fixes, but fundamental changes in every part of the organisation, and that change will not occur overnight. When the current CEO of the Post Office, Nick Reed, started in September 2019, he made it clear that as well as delivering the essential services that we value across our constituencies, the Post Office needs to apologise for the events of the past and fully address them. In terms of the Shadow Minister's point in terms of the current board, there is no one serving on a day-to-day basis in the current board that was here at the time of the scandal. As I say, Nick Reed joined in 2019. There's only one member of the board who's on extended leave on health grounds, but doesn't work on a day-to-day basis. There are no members of the senior management team, the board, who were there at the time. The Post Office are taking steps to right the wrongs of the past. But it's also important to highlight what Post Office has done with a view to the present and future of the business, to improve the culture and ensure a similar situation can never arise again. Crucially, the Post Office are taking steps to restore trust between Post Office and postmasters. This is so important because, as I've said many times in this House, without postmasters, there is no Post Office network. In December 2019, the parties to the group litigation in Bates versus the Post Office took part in a mediation session and issued a joint statement confirming Post Office's commitment to resetting their relationship with postmasters. Since then, Post Office has improved the structure of the board by ensuring that two non-executive director postmasters, nominated and elected by other postmasters, have a seat at the Post Office board. This is intended to make sure that postmaster voices are being heard at the highest level, and that senior management are aware of the impact of decisions that will have on those on the front lines of delivering services. Post Office also created a Postmaster Experience Director role, filled by a serving postmaster. And just pick up the points on the Honourable Lady, the member for Motherwell and Wishaw. This is actually a serving postmaster. It's Mark Elridge, who's a postmaster at Great Massingham. He is seconded to this role, so it may be that he's no longer on a day-to-day basis in that post office, but nevertheless, he is a serving postmaster, and he leads the day-to-day relationship with postmasters. Alongside these senior appointments, Post Office has reformed operational matters to improve culture and trust between senior management, staff and postmasters. Improved training packages and the hiring of over 100 new area managers to provide dedicated local support are all examples of positive changes. And at my meeting yesterday with the voice of the postmaster and the CWU National Postmasters, they spoke very highly, I have to say, of the support and engagement that's provided by these area managers. Post Office has also strengthened how they listen to postmasters with 2 postmaster conferences each year, and conduct a nationwide postmaster consultation each year to provide the foundation of Post Office annual priorities. I experienced firsthand how postmasters in the network today are able to challenge the Post Office leadership on various issues when I chair a regular working group between the Post Office and the National Federation of Sub-Postmasters. I know that, according to various different commentators, their past experience of that particular group has been mixed, but my experience, I have to say, working on an ongoing basis with them, of the challenge they provide is constructive but robust. I know branch profitability is the top priority for postmasters, and I'm pleased that Post Office is committed to increase the share of income going to postmasters. And that's something we've stressed on every occasion we have met. We've also very much stressed the need to control central costs, indeed to reduce central costs, so we see more of the remuneration heading towards postmasters. The clear strategy for Post Office to do that is to make sure the highest share of income goes to postmasters, is around parcels and banking services. And these are key to this particular strategy and something I discuss regularly when we meet. I know that's an issue brought forward by the Honourable Member for Midlothian and indeed my old friend the Member for Strangford. I've been very clear that the banking framework, which is negotiated between Post Office and the UK banks, that they are as ambitious as possible in that negotiation. Banks have saved around about £2.5 billion a year through closure of branches, and a greater share of that, a greater percentage of that, in our view, should go to postmasters directly. I'm very pleased that the Shadow Minister likes our policy on banking hubs, which came as a result principally of our legislation around this in terms of access to cash. There are 30 open already, another 70 in the pipeline, so there'll be about 100, and we anticipate around 500 would be the number of banking hubs that we rolled out across the country. While there is clearly more to do to strengthen the relationship with postmasters, I do believe that the Post Office are making and have made some positive steps forward. In terms of compensation, members raise this particular point quite rightly, and I believe this does speak to the current management culture at Post Office. I accept that getting compensation to those impacted by the scandal has not been as swift as we would have hoped. I can assure members that my department is working hard on compensation alongside colleagues in the Post Office who were recruited specifically for this purpose. As the Secretary of State said recently, we continue to look for ways to speed things up and work closely with the Horizon Compensation Advisory Board in terms of making sure that we deliver faster compensation and that compensation is seen to be fair and is fair. We've recently introduced measures like the fixed sum awards for the overturned convictions of £600,000 and for GLO for £75,000. Just be very clear that those are one option for people who believe their claims will be sufficiently provide sufficient redress for them. For people who believe their claims are above this level, of course, they can go down the full assessment route, but it has the benefit of speedy resolution of claims and reducing the number of people in the queue who want to go down the full assessment route, so it should mean faster resolution of claims for all parties involved in this compensation process. I'm very happy to give way.
Can I thank the Minister? He's had a lot of credit for the assiduous way he's going about righting the wrongs. As members of this House on all sides, we've been contacted by those affected, sub-postmasters who have been either prosecuted or those who have suffered in other ways. Is there a constituency breakdown of the number affected? Because as he goes through this process, some will be more familiar with how to avail themselves than others, and if we can make ourselves available to those affected, not just those prosecuted, that may provide some assistance at a late stage, but nonetheless some solace to them as they try and right the wrongs that he's rightly outlined.
Minister. Well, can I thank him for his intervention and his points and his work on this also. It's interesting, we are seeing more people come forward through colleagues, through ourselves, to the compensation processes, which is very, very welcome. I know what some colleagues have done is written to all their postmasters in their area and asking them to come forward, and I think that's a good positive step. But it is the case that some of us, I myself, wasn't aware that I had a postmaster in my area, Sam Harrison of Norton near Helmsley, who sadly passed away last May, and I wasn't aware that she'd been affected. She's a member of the 555 GLO scheme. Sadly, she's passed away, and so I think these new cases are coming to light all the time. So I'm very happy to work with him and see what information we might be able to provide him so he can take some of those actions and take those forward. We are aware of concerns, as I said before, in terms of the Horizon Shortfall Scheme. This is the first scheme that we set up, and we're looking at ways where we might make sure that that scheme, also compensation, is fair and seen to be fair. Over £160 million has been awarded already to 2,700 victims, and 64% of all claimants thus far, claimants certainly put their claims in prior to the ITV series, and there will be more that come forward as a result, which we welcome. But 64% of people have had full and final compensation for their claims. So much work has been done on this by myself and my predecessors and many officials who do a tremendous job trying to put the wrongs of the past right. But as I say, there's more we can do, and we have more to do. As of the 6th of February, over £35 million has been paid out to those with overturned convictions. There are 42 claims that have been submitted already of the 101 convictions that have been overturned. 36 offers have been made, 32 have been accepted. And a very significant proportion of those have taken the fixed sum award. The £27 million to 479 claimants of the original 555 postmasters who took the post office to court has been paid out. There are 58 completed claim forms have been received. 52 of those people have received offers. 41 of those people have accepted those offers. Without going to the next stage, the independent panel does indicate that people feel the offers they are receiving are fair, because there are 2 further stages in that process if people feel they're not getting fair settlement of their claims. £98 million has been paid out through the Horizon Shortfall Scheme. 2,417 claimants within time, and that time has now been extended, so there are late applications, and those late applications, there's no final date for applications in that scheme, but they were submitted within the original deadline. 2,417 claims have been submitted, 2,417 offers have been made, 2,051 have been settled, 84% of those who have made claims have been settled. In terms of the total compensation amount, which the Honourable Lady raised, in terms of, I think she mentioned a figure of £2 billion, the figure with the maximum budget set thus far has been £1 billion. That's the number we're working to at the moment, but we've always been clear that is not a cap, that is not something that's going to prevent people getting fair compensation for their claims. In terms of the further people coming forward, we are absolutely united with the Post Office in calling for anyone impacted by the scandal to bring forward their claims as soon as possible, and I welcome the fact the ITV drama has helped to uncover people who have not previously come forward. The Honourable Lady raises the point of ongoing shortfalls. It's not there may be instances of that, and of course not all the shortfalls occur as a result of software. Very happy to look at any cases she has on that. I've got to say, in conversations with the National Federation of Sub-Postmasters, with the Voice of the Postmaster and the CWU, that's not been an issue that's been addressed with me thus far, but very happy to look at that as we proceed. While compensation is one part of providing justice, the other part is truth and accountability, something the Post Office has told you they are fully committed to. The Post Office Horizon Inquiry has been established to uncover what went wrong, and the Chair, Sir Wyn Williams, continues to make good progress, and Post Office are fully cooperating with the inquiry. Recent disclosure issues have been disappointing, but they were a consequence of a failure of process rather than a reflection of the management culture. We don't regard this as a deliberate obfuscation, as the Honourable Lady referred to. Nevertheless, it is serious and unacceptable. Certainly, it is something that we want to make sure doesn't happen again. It was reassuring to see that Sir Wyn Williams commented on Friday that he was impressed that the Post Office's new lawyers have a grasp of the scale of the disclosure exercise, and he has no reason to doubt at the moment that the Post Office will continue to assist the inquiry by disclosing relevant material. I must say also the inquiry is also looking at the future of the post office itself from September this year. On governance, strong and effective leadership of post office is essential. As set out in the Post Office Articles of Association, the Business Secretary appoints the Chair and approves the appointments of Directors of Post Office Limited, and it's a role we take very seriously. As members will be aware, following a conversation with the Business Secretary in late January, Henry Staunton agreed to step down as Chair of the Post Office. We judged that the current chairmanship wasn't proving effective, and we had a difficult decision over changing course or waiting and hoping it improved. In terms of ministerial scrutiny, the Shadow Minister refers to, that's something I think the lessons of the past, I think, should be learnt by all ministers in terms of their approach to concerns that are raised. And of course, I think we as the department have learned from this ourselves. And we will continue to look at our governance arrangements and make sure they are fit for purpose. We are not planning any further changes at this time. Members of the House and certainly others have looked at different models of governance of the Post Office and different models and how the Post Office is run, such as mutualisation. And as I say, I met with the Voice of Postmaster and CWU yesterday. I'm very happy to have further conversations with them about this potential route. We are very confident that our representative on UKGI, Lorna Grattan, is doing a good job in terms of making sure that the Post Office governance is fit for purpose. In terms of other points that have been raised, in terms of the surpluses, where the surpluses ended up, in terms of, I think, an honourable member raised by the honourable member for Wansbeck and the honourable lady who's sponsored the debate, whether that went into suspense account, whether it's a profit and loss, whether that went into bonuses for directors. That's an exercise we're currently conducting to find out where that went and how much it was, and we will report accordingly. The honourable member for Inverclyde talked about the role of Fujitsu. We welcome the admission from Fujitsu that they hold a moral responsibility for this scandal and in terms of responsibility to contribute towards the compensation bill, and something we will certainly take forth in due course. I think it's right for us to make sure we understand the extent of that bill, and indeed the inquiry is looking at some of the other matters surrounding Fujitsu. I think it's right we see the outcome of those inquiries. He does mention the role of Ofcom. Ofcom don't regulate the Post Office, they do regulate Royal Mail, and I think there's a distinction there. The honourable member for Wansbeck talks about who knew what, and I think that's something we very much want to know, and the inquiry's purpose itself is to find out exactly that. And he did make the absolutely correct point that no amount of redress could ever make up for what's happened to some people in this scandal, and people who took their own lives, for example, people who were made bankrupt. But the least we can do, I think, is try and make that good through providing them with full and fair compensation. I'm very sorry to hear about Janine, what's happened to her. Very happy to look at that case with him, as he asked me about offline the other day. Certainly this is the case that if an employee suffered detriment, financial detriment, their employer should be able to claim on their behalf, but there may be other cases we need to look at, in that case indeed. So very happy to have that conversation with him. The honourable lady member for Chesham and Amersham talks about NDAs, and it's very clear, and she raised the tragic case of Martin Griffiths within that context. It's absolutely right, as I said today already in an intervention, that the Post Office has said, and it's our position, that no NDA should prevent somebody speaking to relevant individuals, including the members of Parliament, of course. And it is the case, whatever part of our system and wherever an NDA is signed, it is very clear that none of them can ever prevent somebody from speaking out about a crime, going to the police, for example, or other authorities. An NDA cannot prevent somebody from doing that in any circumstance. In terms of the Official Secrets Act, that only covers the confidentiality of mail. They're no longer signed for postmasters. So again, that gentleman that she refers to, I think it's the gentleman she refers to, I'd be very keen that he passes his evidence onto the inquiry, because I think they might find that very useful. The honourable member for Strangford, can I thank him again for his very kind words, and I would say, quite understandably, many people are still affected by the scandal in terms of my performance as the Minister, whether I'm the right person, whether I'm fit for purpose. I guess the jury's out, so I quite understand that, and people will judge me at the end of this process. But whenever I'm here, I'm very keen to make sure that those full and final settlements are made, and made quickly and as fairly as possible. So to conclude, Mr Deputy Speaker, I have outlined some of the progress the Post Office has made in improving its culture, its relationship with postmasters and its determination to right the wrongs of the past. Clearly, despite the positive progress made since 2019, there are still improvements to be made. Where Post Office makes mistakes, I will continue to challenge the leadership, and where action is needed, I will not hesitate to act decisively.
Leave the House. Marion Fellows to wind up the debate.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I want to thank everyone who's taken part in this debate. Today it was quite a surprise that so many people turned up on the Thursday as we go House rises for a recess. Mr Deputy Speaker, I intend to go on with this. I intend to raise more and more debates, to keep this as far as possible in the public eye and in the eye of the House and the Minister and any government that follows. I'd like to maybe just start by mentioning Fujitsu. I too have written to them. I've had no response as yet, but I'm ever hopeful. And that was raised by my colleague, the Honourable Member for Inverclyde. The Honourable Member for Wansbeck has done doughty questioning in committees, and I have had the privilege of listening to him. And again, as so many of us have, he has had so many difficult cases, which sometimes leave you almost gasping for breath and fire you, as they have me, with a real sense of injustice that we have to follow through on this and make sure things are done. I want to thank the Honourable Member for Chesham and Amersham on NDAs and for the Minister's intervention. It is really important that people who are affected by the Horizon scandal, who are affected by working for Post Office Limited or working in conjunction with Post Office Limited as sub-postmasters, they are all able to bring forward their experiences and speak about what has happened to them. I want to give a special mention of thanks to the Honourable Member for Strangford, because he has been very supportive in every single debate that I have brought forward, and in other debates and other subjects that I have brought forward to this House. I think I just want to gently remind the Minister that the Chief Executive Officer of Post Office Limited has been in post for over 4 years. And I think many people, especially postmasters, expected to see more change in this period than seems to be the case. I'm extremely pleased that the Minister is going to include the other representatives, Voice of Postmasters and CWU, and I hope that he will gently remind the Chief Executive or CEO of Post Office Limited that he should be talking to these members too and these organisations too. I'm pleased that things have moved forward a bit. The Minister is pleased that people are accepting £600,000, that's those on the GLO scheme. Perhaps though, and this we have to bear in mind, people are accepting offers because they've simply had enough. They want nothing more to do with the whole process, and they are broken by it. That's something that we should all deeply reflect on. I'm grateful to you, sir, for chairing this debate, partly, and I'm grateful to, as I've said, to all members who have taken place. I don't often compare myself to Arnold Schwarzenegger, but I will be back.
Question is as on the order papers. If any of that opinion say aye. Contrary no. Ayes have it.